what it is, and that we do have, thanks to Michael, we will have the PDFs for the separate chants. We're getting our technical aspects in a better shape here. Then I will do the Dharma talk. And then after that, we will do a group reading. And then we will have our famous discussion group. So if everybody could please sit firmly in your chair and close your eyes, and we are going to start the silent meditation. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, 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 namadats. So this evening we are going to chant the Jusei Ge. If you do have the Hawaii book or have the PDF, it's on page 55. And what I'd like us to do, if we can remember in the discussion group, we can talk about if we want to do a variance of chants. I know that some people say it's a little artificial online, but I'd like your feedback because I do like having variety as well. So if we can talk about that in the discussion group, please. So we'll be chanting the Jusei Ge. 가곤 조세간 이시무조도 시간 불만족 세프조쇼각 가오 무료코大世书佛塞小兵个政府上小学合士上運動名所長寿法空教未証門政府上小学利欲人少年上映集 しぐ無浄土、一生天人師、人力現代公、不詳無才道、少女三苦名、交際集約難、回避知恵言、滅死根毛案、閉塞小悪道、通達全宗門、高僧上満足、いよろじぽ、日月修十期、天候音符言、一種解放像、公正功徳法、上王大修十、説法四識、供養一切仏、具足修徳本、元年秩序満、徳意三害を、如仏無下知、通達未不詳、願学営力、奉仕最小尊、志願若国家、大仙お感動、北昇天人、法内妙見、願にしく読、平等聖祭、道本菩提心、往生安楽。Namadats, namadats, 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 namadats. So today we are going to be talking about the idea of what a bodhisattva is. And I would like to start with a reading. So if you could please join me in Gasho. For others, as for oneself, what is suffering may be beneficial. Do beneficial, pleasant things, but not the pleasant if it is not beneficial. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats. So that reading I started off with was a little unusual because I don't think it follows the natural progression logically of what we talk about. It says to do for one others that may be beneficial and beneficial pleasant things, but not pleasant if it's not beneficial. And I hope if I'm successful at the end of the talk, you'll understand what I'm trying to express more clearly. So last week we had people saying, well, the subject of a bodhisattva came up in our discussion group. And it's a very important concept in Buddhism. For us that are part or identify as Jodo Shinshu or as a Mahayana Buddhist, the idea of a bodhisattva is very specific. It's often referred to as a celestial being. For those that have been to some of the more traditional temples, maybe in California, or if you're lucky enough in Japan, when you look at the Onaiji, you look up and then there's carvings of all these mythical animals. Some of them are creatures, some of them are bodhisattvas, and they're playing instruments. Actually, if you ever get to go to the Stockton Temple, they have a beautiful representation of the musicians of the bodhisattvas. But we must look at it in the larger group because bodhisattva is also a term that is used in the Theravadan tradition. And for their understanding of the term bodhisattva, it's not this idea of a celestial being or a symbolic creature that helps others reach enlightenment. It's actually a step on the way to Buddhahood. And I will not go into detail here because that's not the point of my talk, because we are talking from a Jodo Shinshu or a Mahayana perspective here. And so the idea is that when we look at that beautiful artwork in the traditional temples, or if we read the sutras, the holy texts, they have these wonderful descriptions of them flying through the sky, telling you the teachings that you need to hear. They go take you to the Pure Land, but then they return to bring other people, other souls back to the Pure Land. But I think for a lot of us, we don't think of a bodhisattva as an actual celestial being. Some people might. I'm not disagreeing with them, but I think most of us think of it more as a concept of this idea that instead of us trying to reach Buddhahood on our own through our own self-power, is that the idea is that we try to help others, as we mentioned in Shin Buddhism, with working with the Sangha. And the idea, I love the concept of the idea that the bodhisattvas can go to nirvana or can go to the Pure Land, but they return to help others. It's a beautiful idea. So the idea is viewed differently. I had the experience many years ago in LA having a friend who was a Japanese American, born and raised as a Shin Buddhist, and she would go to seminars and she would always debate the professor, or she would debate the minister, because she was uncomfortable with all the symbolism that we talked about. She says, is the Pure Land a place? Is Amida Buddha a real person? What is a bodhisattva? And I had the pleasure of meeting her later, many years later, and she looked much happier. And I was on the bus, I sat next to her, and she says, Kurt, I'm so glad you found Jodo Shinshu. And she says, I have found Theravada Buddhism, and I feel very comfortable. She liked that idea of the rules and the regulations that where she was told, this is what a bodhisattva is, this is what enlightenment is. And so I was trying to do small talk. I mean, doing small talk with a Buddhist group is kind of impossible, right? So I said, Linda, I said, well, what about like the wonderful idea of the bodhisattva? And she goes, oh, those things that fly around in the air, supposedly, oh, that's a bunch of malarkey. And so I smiled to myself because I realized that she was looking at it in a very literal sense. And I am glad. She was glad that I found Shin Buddhism. I'm glad she found Theravada Buddhism. She was so happy and was really engaged. So this idea of what a bodhisattva is sometimes does get weighed down in all the art and the cosmology. When I went to the Institute of Buddhist Studies, I had many brilliant professors, and I bought a book on the cosmology of Buddhism, and my professor saw I had in my backpack, and she says, do you understand what that says? And I go, no. She says, none of the professors can make head nor sense of what it is either. Because this idea that trying to express the Buddhist ideas or the Buddhist teachings in metaphors and stories is very strong in our tradition and in Mahayana Buddhism. And our dualistic mind is very easy for us to think of it as a real person or a real place. So, one of the things I did is I looked up the word bodhisattva, and it means literally an enlightened being, which is bodhi, and then so enlightenment is bodhi and being is sattva. So bodhisattva is an enlightened being. Traditionally, is anyone who is motivated by great compassion and has entered bodhicitta, which is a form of meditation, and is a spontaneous wish to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So those of you that have read some of our Pure Land texts, Jodo Shinshu texts, it sounds sort of familiar to what Amida Buddha did, but we have to remember in our story, before he became a Buddha, he was Dhammakara. So the idea was that he made these vows that all beings will be able to reach enlightenment. If I don't reach it, then everyone doesn't reach enlightenment, then I will not become Amida Buddha. So again, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a different understanding of what a bodhisattva is. But today I'd like to reflect it on a more personal level, because I think for us, when we talk about trying to incorporate the Buddhist teachings in our everyday life, when we share stories about what we have gone through, I think people can sometimes see in that story the wisdom. And so what I would like to do is I would like to share the story that I had about who I discovered to be a Bodhisattva for me personally, who on the surface of everything would not be somebody that you would consider a Bodhisattva. So this person was definitely not a celestial being flying around in beautiful robes. And in fact, this person was somebody that was homeless and had substance abuse. And so as many of you know, my first assignment was Fresno. And like a lot of temples on the West Coast, the first generation Japanese, where they built their temples 100 years ago were fine. And now they are in areas that are in low economic areas and a lot of homelessness. And that was definitely the way with the temple downtown in Fresno. In fact, when you would go up, because the temple was the traditional 4-story, so the Onaijin, the Hondo was on the top floor. And so it was so funny because it was my first assignment. So when you rang the concho, it was outside. So you'd open the door and it was a 3-story drop. And it was this braided mesh that you're standing on. Chris is smiling. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm like, I would hold on for dear life. And so to make everything more unusual is that I'd start ringing the concho and there'd be a whole group of homeless people and they go, yay, good job, good job. But it was interesting because here we were, this Buddhist group, and we were in the middle of this situation. And we did have people that came in, but this person, who I'll call Bob, actually was a musician. And so at the temple, Reverend Miyagi and myself, we would do service every morning at 9 a.m. And usually it was the Shoshin-ge, so we would do the chanting. And he heard the chanting outside. And so Bob came in and sat in the pews. A lot of our older members no longer were able to come. And so we were both happy that there was somebody there besides he and myself. And then we found out that Bob was a jazz musician. He was a drummer. And so he was instantly thrilled with the idea of chanting. And so I developed this relationship with him. And then he was living in a camp near where the temple was. And this shows you what our homeless situation is. I'm not going to get political. This is just a fact, is that he was living in what we would call a garden shed. So to provide shelter for a large group of single men, they bought these a garden with no air conditioning. Fresno can get to 110 in the summertime. And so they would have their sleeping bags, but he was not outside. He wasn't in the sun. And here he would come every day to temple. And so I knew what his lifestyle was like. Also, he appeared older. He obviously probably had substance abuse, though we never really talked about it. But his physical appearance, he looked 20 years older than he actually was. But his enthusiasm for coming in and practicing the chanting and trying to understand the chanting. And I really wish I recorded because they had a piano in the Hondo. And he would go, no, and he started playing these chords and he invented this song. And it's one of my sad things that I never recorded because it was beautiful. It was a jazz version of the Nembutsu that was very moving. So as because Bob, we went on and we developed a friendship and he would come in and then he ended up receiving benefits. He got Social Security, disability, and he got housing. And unfortunately, when things like that happen, it sounds great on the surface, but if you have substance abuse problems, you've got somewhere to live and you have income. And unfortunately, Bob slipped back into his substance abuse and stopped coming as frequently. And so I was very concerned for him. And so what I did was that in Fresno, there were 5 other temples in the immediate area that we supervised. And so I said, do you want to come with me to another service? And he goes, oh, I don't know if I want to do that, Kurt. And I go, well, please, let's do this. And I thought it was being helpful to him. So we went I called once a month, we had the grand tour where we would do a service in Fresno, then we jump in the car and we go to Kingsburg, and then we go to a 3rd temple. It was very tiring. And Bob was sitting in the front row. And when I was giving my Dharma talks, he was going like this. No. He was obviously not happy with my Dharma talk, right? And him and I having a relationship, I could take it easier, but he started getting more, how should I say this? Not abrasive, but more caustic. So here I took him out to lunch. He never said thank you for any of this. Not thank you for taking me to this other temple. Not thank you for taking me out to lunch. And in fact, when we went to lunch, he told me what was wrong with my Dharma talk. which was good because he was actually quite right in certain areas. But our relationship and his relationship with the temple started to go away. And when we got a new Rinban, Miyagi Sensei transferred. He didn't like the new Rinban, and so he basically dropped out of coming to the temple. And in retrospect, I was glad because he was so caustic when he would interface with me. And so, who wants to hear, that your Dharma talk is baloney every week and not thank you for things. I mean, I'm human too, right? And so when I got transferred, I thought I'd never see him again, but I would think about him. And I found out later that he had passed away. Again, probably because of the substance abuse. He was 50 years old, died of a heart attack. And so part of it is that when I was at Fresno, it was my first assignment, and I was very nervous and very green. And when Tony would make a comment, then I get defensive. But I realized in retrospect, especially because I had transferred actually to Ekoji for the first time from Fresno, is that when I heard his passing, it was very touching for me because I realized that in the sense of what a bodhisattva is, somebody that's there, like the expression at the beginning of this talk, is that if it's pleasant, that's fine. But if it's pleasant and it does not work, it's not effective, so to speak. So Tony, Kurt, Bob, because I had a relationship with him, so I'm sorry about that. But the idea is that the idea of a bodhisattva being this beautiful being that only tells you the good things in life, it gives you the idea that the bodhisattva could be somebody or something that is not pleasant in your life, maybe something that causes disturbance or makes you feel uncomfortable. I'm in the process of recording the beginning Buddhist classes for Ekoji that they'll play before the services on Sunday. And I've been talking a lot about dukkha or suffering in these talks that Kin outlined for us. And so this idea of the bodhisattva is to come, in that the idea that the suffering also can be the flip side, that is a tool if we let it be. So in the talks that I've been recording, it talks about the Buddha being very well aware of our suffering, and that what is pleasant is not always the best for us. In fact, the idea of craving and greed are when we're trying to find something that we actually don't have and are trying to get more things, and we're not present in the moment. So with Bob, I think he's a perfect example, and I purposely gave this talk on a more personal level because I think it'll be wonderful when we have the discussion and open it up as like, what do you think as a bodhisattva? I've had so many people that talk about animals being bodhisattvas. And so this will be something that will be interesting for us to discuss. But I do want to point out that the idea that the bodhisattva is something, again, from this intro to class, that's reminding me is that the Dharma is something alive and interactive. And so when we talk about the bodhisattva ideal, the idea is that the Dharma is something that we try to understand, but then we share it. And again, in Shin Buddhism, that is one of the key components about having the Sangha, is that we share. And then we go through difficult times and we go through good times. And the idea is that we're trying to look at everybody as a bodhisattva. So I would like to conclude with the reading that I said in the beginning, and maybe the words will make a little more sense now, in the idea that, Bob for me was somebody that was abrasive, and I did not realize until his passing that how he was a bodhisattva for me, how he taught me humility, how he taught me to look at myself in self-reflection. So please join me in Gasho. For others, as for oneself, what is suffering may be beneficial. Do beneficial, pleasant things, but not the pleasant things if they are not beneficial. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats. Okay, I'd like us to do a group reading, please. So the reading is in the book or in the PDF. It is the homages is on page 2. Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the teachings of the Blessed One. Now we hear them. If we do not gain emancipation in this present life, we may not be freed from infilling the oceans of birth and death for kalpas, Let us reverently take refuge in the three treasures. We go to the Buddha for guidance. May we always walk in the way that leads to enlightenment. We go to the Dharma for guidance. May we be submerged in the depths of the teaching and gain wisdom as deep as the ocean. We go to the Sangha for guidance. May we all, with one accord, live the life of harmony in the spirit of oneness, freed from the bondage of selfishness. Even through myriad ages of kalpas, hard is it to hear such an excellent and profound teaching. Now we're able to hear and receive them. Let us try to understand the Tathagata's teachings. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo thoughts, Namo thoughts. Okay, I would just like to end with just a very short silent meditation, and then we'll go into the discussion group. So please sit in your chair, relax, and we'll do silent meditation. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo thoughts, Namo thoughts. So thank you. That concludes our service. Now, if we can go into the discussion group, if we could stop the recording, please.